heard a lot of you talking about your vision also. Some of you articulated a business vision, some of you articulated a personal vision, right? This whole thing is always two parallel journeys, right? Because it's actually only a journey for yourself, right? And then everything else is just an outcome of kind of how that journey for yourself progresses, right? And I actually started with Chola and started with Isha at the same time. And so, basically for me, the whole process is not separable at all, right? Start off as a particular model, right? You might start off as a Tata Nano, and you might say, I want to leave as a Ferrari, right? Or you might say, I want to leave as a rocket ship, or whatever you want to, right? So basically, that is the process, right? When I started in Chola, we had about, I think 3,000 people. Now we have about 55,000 people, right? Do you think that they are all aligned totally with the direction in which you're sending the ship? You're taking the ship? Yes, no? So that's the first thing you have to recognize, right? Which is, do you have actual focus on the organization or not? Most of the time, I think organizations don't, because you'll either have a middle management layer. Actually, the layer around you is the biggest part of the solution and the biggest part of the problem, right? Because they have access to you, right? Which means that they have access to the power structure, right? How they use that need not necessarily be in the best interest of the company, right? So the first thing you have to recognize is how you change that, right? What are you going to do to align? If you want to scale up, right, you need bandwidth. That's the first thing, right? Organization is a summation of the organisms in it, right? So we are all organisms. Many organisms together make the organization, right? So sigma I equals to 1 to n. I mean, I don't know how many engineers in the room, of basically all the people, right? X being the number of people, right, is the total energy in the organization. So that is the first thing, right? If you actually kind of sum up that total energy, it's a lot of energy, right? For scaling up, I think this becomes a very important criteria, right? What do you do to increase the energy in the organization? Add more people. I'm not sure that's a good answer. It can be sometimes, but not all the time. What are the things? Motivate people. Incentives, okay? Set ambitious goals. What else? Train them, upgrade them. The path of the company is defined by you. So the first question all of this is, how much energy do you have? Right? And I think, that's the one thing that I've learned from Isha, is that you can basically increase the amount of energy that you have at least like 100-fold, right? I mean, you can either be like, like a 5-watt kind of bulb, or you can be like a nuclear reactor, right? Don't expect that you can kind of just show up and say, okay, I'm a nuclear reactor, right? It takes a lot of work. You have to spend a lot of time on yourself, a lot of sadhana to basically make yourself that nuclear reactor, right? Then the second is, you have to be able to multiply that in the organization. You have to be able to make nuclear reactors of everybody else, right? And for this, again, I'll use a science example. It comes from thermodynamics. Who has heard of the concept of sources and sinks? You've observed this, right? You go into a meeting, just one person walks in, right? And then the energy level of the entire room goes up, right? Similarly, have you seen the opposite, right? One person enters the room, the entire energy in the room goes puss. So basically, you have to ask yourself, what are you? When you walk in every day, are you a source or are you a sink? Right now, I look after 3 companies, right? Yeah. So I look after Chola, TI, and CG, right? Yeah. Now, you can't possibly run all of those companies in an executive role. There's no way you'd have the bandwidth. They're totally different businesses, right? Yeah. So, like, one of the rules I have is that if I'm doing something, right, in the company, my senior management, when I started at Chola, I used to say the senior management team has to be doing it 24 months from now, okay? Now in CG and in TI, I've said 12 months from now, right? Which is, if I'm doing X, they have to be doing it 12 months from there. And then they have to delegate that same X down one more level within another 12 months, right? So basically, the only way you're going to create organizational capacity or bandwidth is by keeping on pushing things down. See, succession planning is something, first off, in family businesses, I kind of think it starts very early, right? Because again, when I talked about, interaction with my cousins, all of that, right? Part of those interactions also, what starts happening is, at an early stage, it starts getting established who the real leaders are, right? And you want that natural establishment to happen, right? Now, why are some of the things? Why is it important that I would go and spend summers in my aunts and uncles' houses as well? Because if let's just say I have to be a leader and I have to be a leader over one of those cousins, right? Where will the animosity come from? Right? The animosity will come if there's there's an ownership that that aunt or uncle only has for their own children, and then they see, oh, this is somebody else's kid, we've got to promote our kid. Right? When you start thinking of family businesses, becomes a very important dynamic. So you have to kind of be able to reduce to a substantial extent that kind of very tight bond, right, within the nuclear family, right? And you have to make it a bond within a larger family for people to understand that the nuclear family bond is not the most important, right, to make the business scale. That's the only way that you can actually think of something that will scale over a long period of time. Now the question is, how do you make them get into that position? You have to have interaction at a very early stage, because that is the formative stage. Almost always, you'll be able to pick who is the right person to run the business. The problem will be, how do I put that right person into that position? Right? Because I'll be upsetting somebody else, then that guy will get mad, then what will they say? They have a higher share, so they'll want their person in. If you come down to that, you're already too late. Right? So you have to start saying at an early stage, what am I going to do? Okay, it could be simpler. Okay, if there's some of you and you have one son or daughter, right, and you really want that person, it's a simpler situation. Then the focus then the energy and focus is, what are you doing to kind of raise them right? But when you have these more complex structures, you have to have that evolutionary process of grooming much earlier in the mix, right? Yeah. And these grooming constructs are not at work, right? They're often social, they're often, that's why in most families you'll have so much interaction outside the workplace. It's very, very critical, right? Once that starts getting lost, and that's a challenge with everything going more nuclear that Sadhguru talked about, you will start kind of seeing that fabric getting pulled apart a bit.